Shalom. Welcome to Light to the Nations. We've been talking about the menorah that stands in the sanctuary of the Holy Temple, that most important, symbolic, central of the temple vessels. And when we were last together speaking about the menorah, we were discussing on the symbolic level some aspects of what the menorah represents and some speculation about the depths of the whole concept of the light of the menorah. And of course, that does not take away from the details and the necessity to know exactly intrinsically how to build the menorah. The Torah is all about action, it's all about the fulfillment of the commandments, and as you know, we have in fact created at least an initial version of the golden menorah in the Temple Institute in Jerusalem. The commandments of God regarding the Holy Temple beckon to be fulfilled. We believe they are no different than any of the other commandments in the Torah. They are obligatory upon all of Israel, and it is our privilege in this generation to try as best as possible to bring about the time of the Holy Temple by creating the things that will be used there. And the menorah, of course, is the central theme of the Holy Temple, the presence of the light of the divine presence. And Maimonides tells us very clearly the concept, the pattern, the form of the menorah. This, of course, after we have spoken about the fact that according to the Midrash, even Moses himself had difficulty in understanding the concept of the menorah, the format of the menorah. We mentioned that our sages tell us that Moses eventually saw an image of the menorah, a heavenly form that God showed him so that it would be easier for him to understand how to create the menorah. We mentioned that Maimonides, the Ramban, explains to us how the concept of the location of the flowers, cups, and knobs on the menorah is exceedingly elusive, to use his language, and many different interpretations about what it was exactly that bothered Moses and how he was having trouble understanding the concept. In any event, again, we know that it is possible to make it into an exact science, to hone it into an art. We know that King Solomon actually created an additional 10 menorot in the first temple, and we spoke about what that signifies. And here, Maimonides gives us a very exacting description of the decorations of the menorah. And we also mentioned that, as opposed basically to all of the other vessels in the menorah, in the Holy Temple, it's important to realize that these decorations, to use the word, that are specified by the verses in the Torah are not just decorative. In other words, they are not something which are an embellishment, which are just an artistic flair. These decorations are actually part of the fulfillment of the commandment itself. And thus, while when coming to fulfill any of the other kelim, when we come to create the vessels that are described in the verses for the Holy Temple, our policy in the Institute is that the artist generally has a certain amount of license to interpret the vessel and make it beautiful and to honor the commandment of Hashem. But when it comes to the menorah, these decorations are an intrinsic part of the kashrut, the validity, the kosherness of the vessel. So let's go back again to Halacha Aleph, where we read that Maimonides tells us, HaMenorah Mefureshet Tzurata b'Torah. The exact form of the menorah is explained in the Torah. V'arba gvi'im u'shnei kafturim u'shnei prachim hayu b'knei HaMenorah. And 4 goblets, or cups can be translated, and 2 knobs or flowers, 2 knobs and 2 flowers were in the central branch of the menorah. Shne'amar, as the verse states, uba menorah, and in the menorah, arba'a gvi'im, 4 cups, mishukadim, almond-like, kaftoreha, its buttons or its knobs, depending how you translate, ufracha, and its flowers. That's the verse in Exodus 25:34. When we refer to the menorah, Maimonides tells us that the menorah, the word that is being used by the Torah, is a reference to the central branch. The menorah, the identity of the menorah, the main concept of the menorah is the central branch with 6 branches coming out of the sides, 3 and 3, so we have 7 branches altogether. And that's an important thing for us to realize, as now Maimonides will begin to group the groupings is the only word I can use, the concentrations of where these ornaments are, the decorations are on the menorah. The main identity of the menorah is the central branch. The Torah here uses a very unusual word. I'll just see what the translation here is. We have it translated as made like almonds. Mishukadim, the root of the word being shaked, an almond, that these cups are made like almonds, almond-like, almondesque, if you were. There was something about these cups which had an embossing or had a motif of the fruit of the almond. As we'll see, there is a question amongst our sages as to whether this almondesque aspect also applies to the knobs and the flowers of the menorah or only to the cups. But certainly the cups are made like almonds, and then Maimonides continues into. So this is in the central branch of the menorah. There are the 4 cups that are almond-like, its knobs and its flowers, and then Maimonides continues and tells us ve'od perach shlishi haya samuch liyericha shel menorah, and there was an additional 3rd flower close to the stem of the menorah, shene'emar, as the verse states, ad yerecha ad pircha, unto its stem, unto its flower. That's the verse in chapter 8 of Bamidbar, Numbers. So basically, again, Maimonides starting off with the premise and explaining that the menorah is basically consists of a central branch from which emerge an additional 6 branches. This central branch is known as the menorah, as it were, the menorah itself. And this he learns actually from the verses of the Torah. And now Maimonides begins to explain the layout of the ornamentation on the menorah based first on this central branch. And this reckoning now that he gives us of these decorations does not include the 3 knobs from which emerge the branches of the menorah, because those he's going to be explaining in the next halacha. So, again, first of all, there are 3 cups. There are 3 cups, flowers, and knobs in the upper section of the central branch of the menorah, and then there is a cup, knob, and flower in the bottom section of the central branch. And then, in addition to this, as Maimonides tells us, there's another flower which is close to the stem, the base of the menorah. And thus, all told, in the central branch of the menorah, there are 4 cups, 2 knobs, and 2 flowers, in addition to the flower which is close to the base. This additional flower, where he says, Ve'od perach shlishi haya samuch li'recha shel menorah, the additional flower, the 3rd one, which he relates to the verse in the book of Numbers, is actually close to the bottom, or we'll say the legs of the menorah. We'll see why in a moment. That's not such a simple statement either. And there is a question in general in the words of our sages regarding the exact format of the base of the menorah. The first thing that Maimonides tells us in the beginning of Halacha Bet of this chapter is V'shalosh raglayim hayula. Maimonides tells us the menorah had 3 feet. And this is very exceptional and unusual entry. This is very important for us to dwell on, because in the Torah itself, these 3 feet are not mentioned. In fact, these 3 feet of the menorah, which Maimonides mentions here, are not cited in the Talmud either. In Tractate Menachot, which deals extensively with the laws pertaining to the menorah, we find no mention of these legs. However, the great sage Rashi does mention in his commentary on Exodus chapter 25, when he talks about the base, Rashi does mention this concept of the legs. And Maimonides also cites this opinion, his own opinion, in his commentary in the Mishnah on Tractate Menachot. So there are different opinions that some of the later sages offer regarding this position of Maimonides. There are those who explain that regarding the size and the weight and the nature of the menorah, it was hard to imagine how something of that height and something of that weight would be able to support itself evenly without the legs. It would seem that Maimonides had considered all of this and came to the conclusion that although the legs are not specified in the Torah, he seems to have taken it as a given that the legs would be included. It's hard to determine from his words whether or not he is stating that the legs would be absolutely necessary, intrinsically imperative for the fulfillment of the menorah. This is not something that he tells us clearly, but this is his position for now that we will satisfy ourselves with, that the menorah features 3 legs. He goes on in Halacha Bet to tell us, Ushlosha kafturim acherim hayu b'knei hamenorah, shemehen yotzim sheshet akanim, shlosha b'tzad zeh ushlosha mitzad zeh. That in addition to the reckoning which he told us regarding the 4 cups, 2 knobs, and 2 flowers that he taught us about in Halacha Aleph, here he tells us, as I mentioned briefly in Halacha Aleph, that there are an additional 3 knobs in the center branch from which grow out, blossom as it were, from which are extended the 6 branches, 3 on each side. Ubechol kaneh v'kaneh mehen shlosha gviim v'kaftor v'ferach. And on each one of these 6 branches, you will find an additional 3 cups, 1 knob, and 1 flower. V'hakol mishukadim kimushkedim be'asiyatan. And they are all made like almonds. This too is a unique position of Maimonides. There is a question amongst the other commentators and the other sages regarding the expression that the Torah uses, almond-like, mishukadim. There are opinions that, for example, only the cups were almond-like. There are positions that the flowers and the knobs were also almond-like. What Maimonides is basically telling us here is that everything, all of the decorations on the menorah, the cups, the knobs, and the flowers are all made in the form of almonds. And there are different ideas that are expressed in the Talmud itself, in Tractate Yoma. Our sages are in doubt as to whether this word, mishukadim, almond-like, applies to all of the decorations, to the cups as well, as the flowers and knobs, because the verse itself seems to indicate that it only applies to the cups. And there, in Tractate Yoma, you may be interested to know that they don't actually reach a conclusion. But the Kesef Mishnah, which is the classic commentary on Maimonides, explains that basically the Rambam is going what's called l'chumra. That means he is taking the stringent position and taking the position that the Torah's intention should be applied to everything, to the cups as well as the knobs and flowers, and that in fact is the position which he expresses here. So we can have an illustration here showing the concept of mishukadim. Here you see actually that the flower itself carries a certain form of an almond. And that's basically the idea that's being expressed here by the Torah, mishukadim, that these things are carrying a certain motif which resembles the almond. In Halacha Gimel, Maimonides gives us the summary and tells us, Nimtzeu kol hagviim shnayim ve'esrim. All of the cups together we will find are 22. Ve'haprachim tish'ah, 9 flowers. Ve'hakaftorim achadasar, and 11 knobs. Ve'kulan me'akvim ze et ze. And all of them would impede each other. And there's that concept that we've referred to, the ikuva, the concept of something being an intrinsic necessity, so that if its presence would somehow be withheld, then the kashrut of the item would be delayed, it would be blemished. So he tells us that every single one of these decorations is dependent on one another, and they are all intrinsically imperative in order for the vessel to be considered kosher. The menorah, featuring the flowers, knobs, and cups, must feature 22 cups, 9 flowers, and 11 knobs, and they all depend on each other. And he continues and says, "Va'afilu chaser echad min hashnayim va'arba'im me'akev et kulan." Even if one of these decorations would be missing, then the rest would be fruitless and the menorah would not be kosher. It must feature all of these decorations. However, in Halacha Daled, Maimonides clarifies the whole picture of the menorah, and I think this is something which we have had opportunity to mention but not to emphasize until this point. B'med dvarim amurim, the Rambam tells us in Halacha Daled. When is all of this applicable? When is this true? When do we say all of this? B'she'asa'ua zahav, when the menorah was created of gold. Aval shar minei matachot, however, if the menorah would be created out of any other metal, ein osinba gvi'im kaftorim uprachim, then we would not create the cups, knobs, and flowers. So this is a halacha which actually has a historical precedent and a practical application today as well. And the Torah's mitzvot, the fulfillment of these commandments, it's really all about kind of stages of, I wouldn't say stages of history, although they're manifest in stages of history. They're about stages of reality of what we are able to accomplish at any given point in time. But the beauty of doing a mitzvah is that there is a principle in Jewish law that however much we can do of the mitzvah, then that's how much we can do. Classic examples of this concept. In the time of the Second Temple, the shamir, which was the creature, worm or snail, that had some sort of secretion from its body that allowed for the names of the tribes of Israel to be cut into the stones of the breastplate without using metal. That creature was missing in the time of the Second Temple. Its identity had been lost before the conclusion of the era of the First Temple. And so the names of the tribes of Israel were not engraved on the stones of the breastplate in the Second Temple. And thus, the aspect of the Urim V'Tumim was missing from the breastplate in the Second Temple. Right? The Urim V'Tumim is one particular aspect of the breastplate. It's the aspect which enabled the king of Israel or the high priest to receive divine intervention, an answer to a question that affected the entire community, to receive a divine answer to a question, because the names of the tribes of Israel inscribed on the stones of the breastplate featured, in addition to some other words, featured all of the 22 letters of the alphabet. When the question was posed, by tremendous concentration and meditation on the holy name of God, which was written on a parchment, inserted into a flap of the garment of the choshen, the breastplate, then the Kohen Gadol would receive divine illumination and would be able to get the answer to his question through particular letters on the breastplate that shone forth. Now, in the time of the Second Temple, that was not the case, because the shamir, this worm or snail, with this acidic-like secretion that was able to perform, wasn't a miracle, it was a scientific fact, was able to perform the job of engraving the names without cutting with metal, which is a prohibition, wasn't around. So they didn't engrave the names on the stones. And of course now we have been able to do this with laser technology. We've been able to engrave the names without using metal. And because they didn't engrave the names, the breastplate did not function as the Urim V'Tumim. But they had to have a breastplate because there is another halacha, which we will learn much later, regarding the garments of the high priest, that the Kohen Gadol must have all 8 garments upon him while he is serving in the Holy Temple. He is not called a Kohen Gadol without all 8 garments. And in fact, there's a specific category of kind of like a Kohanic transgression that the Kohen would be committing if he is serving in the Holy Temple without one of the garments. It's called in Hebrew Mechusar Bigadim. He's missing one of the garments. And there's actually a death penalty from heaven on a Kohen who would be serving in the temple without all 8 garments. So they made the Choshen, the breastplate, but it did not possess the Urim V'Tumim. But because of the fact, and this is my point, because of the fact that it didn't have the oracle-like aspect of the Urim V'Tumim, that was not a reason not to make the breastplate. And it was, in fact, a kosher breastplate. And in fact, the Kohen Gadol would have been prohibited from serving in the Holy Temple without all 8 garments, without the breastplate. So the fact that they had been prevented by whatever circumstances were not able to make the names on the stones did not stop them from doing the best they could and making the breastplate. So too, we have the mitzvah, the commandment of tzitzit, the fringes that we wear on our garments, from the verse in the book of Numbers. And you know that according to the Torah, one of those strings is supposed to be dyed with sky blue. And that's very important. But for many, many years, that blue was missing. And of course today there are many people who believe that the blue has been identified, and there are different opinions. And today many people go again with the sky blue thread, and it's it. But for all of those years that the blue was missing, the mitzvah was fulfilled with only the whites, because of this principle in Jewish law that when you have one part of a mitzvah that you can do, then you do that part. So Maimonides here tells us that when you are making a menorah out of gold, that is when it must have this exact count and location of the cups, the knobs, and the flowers. However, he says, if a menorah is created out of any other metal, then these ornamentations, these decorations which are really part of the halacha, are not made. And of course, that was the case in the time of the Chashmonayim, the story of Hanukkah, when the Maccabees created a simple menorah out of leaden rods in the beginning of their rise to power, when they first re-entered the temple and cleansed it. They had no other metal at their disposal. There is a general principle that Maimonides tells us later on, that all of the temple vessels must be made of metal. Actually, we learned this already, in fact. All of the temple vessels must be made out of metal, even simple metal, if the congregation is not able to procure something more beautiful. So they made a menorah originally out of simple lead. Years later, they made one out of silver, and only many years later, when they regained some of their wealth, they were able to create one out of gold. So a menorah made out of gold must have the exact details of the Torah's requirements for the menorah. But if one is in a situation where the only menorah that can be made is one out of silver or any other metal, then just as the breastplate was made without the names of the tribes of Israel, that menorah would be made without the flowers, cups, and knobs. Maimonides continues here in Halacha Daled, the 4th halacha in chapter Gimel, chapter 3, and tells us, V'chein menorah haba zahav tihya kula kikar im neroteha. Also, a menorah which is created out of gold should be made out of 1 talent of gold, including its candles. This is something that we have to explain exactly what it means, because it's actually quite complicated. V'tihya kula miksha min ha'ashatot, and it should be made out of 1 hammered piece. V'shel shar minei matachot ein makpidin al mishkala, and it goes on to tell us that if a menorah is created out of any other metal, we are not concerned about its weight. V'im hayta chalula kshera, and if it would have been hollow, that also would be permitted. And these last comments regarding the hollowness, regarding a menorah made out of another metal, that we're not concerned about its exact weight, these things applying to a menorah not made out of gold have to be analyzed exactly under what conditions is the Rambam speaking, when exactly can a menorah be made out of other metals, and what is this aspect of hollow. All of this, again, as we mentioned, has historical precedent, and the basic premise is that when we come to fulfill the commandments of the Torah and we have a chance to begin the resumption of the divine service, we should take that chance and create the vessels according to the commandments of God as best as possible. This particular halacha, actually quite complicated. We're going to see that there is some controversy regarding the candles, the exact lamps, the lights of the menorah, and as we continue, we're going to analyze the position of Maimonides and the position of others as well regarding the lights of the menorah, those lights which in the time of the first temple were actually 70, the 70 nations, because the light of the menorah represents the tranquility of the world when the light of the divine presence is returned to it, the light to Israel and the light to the nations.